taking me into your home.
Yes.
Appreciate it. Wanted to have a discussion with you about your father, may he rest in peace, about his life, about his works. I know there's a new book that just came out.
Yeah.
But I'll start briefly about you. Rabbi Abe is the rabbi at Ohel David Shlomo.
Right.
He has a YouTube page called Torat Andalus where
Yes.
he focuses on Sephardic Judaism,
Yes.
right? As came down from the Andalusian tradition.
Yeah.
You wanna speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I try to teach Torah in accordance with the authentic traditions of Harambam, of the Geonim, of my father, Alav Shalom. And when I say authentic, what I like to say, or how I like to explain that, is that on the one hand, we believe very strongly in Masoret. We believe very strongly in tradition. We don't like making light of any halacha, of any gemara, of any law. You know, we really give tremendous importance to every law. But at the same time, so it's authentic, but at the same time, we try to explain things in a very modern fashion so that an educated person can, oh, that's what that mitzvah means. Now I understand. I always thought that mitzvah was like outdated. And let's give you a quick example, korbanot. Like almost every modern person I speak to, they give you the same line. Oh, korbanot is like, well, yeah, in those days, people believe that this is how you worship God, and we needed korbanot. And Harambam says that we really didn't want to have korbanot, but because of whatever, we had it. Okay, that's the story. You hear that all the place. So you'll have two approaches to Judaism. One is like the more dogmatic, we don't care. This is the way it is, and that's it. The other is, oh, come on, like really, we're going to have korbanot? So my approach would be, and this is my father, is, well, yes, the Torah says to have korbanot, so we're going to have korbanot whether we understand it or not. But there's a very deep understanding of korbanot. Yeah. And if you think that korbanot is not important in the modern context, it's just because you didn't study Harambam, the Moreh Nebuchim, my father's writings, properly. And if you study these things and you understand, it's like, oh, wow, we really do need korbanot.
It's very eye-opening, especially with what you're saying. And, you know, really, since I remember, just so you know, and I think my family owes zechut to your father. Since I remember, I have use of memory. Hakham Faur said this, Hakham Faur said that. My father always brought him up, and it's really one of the main reasons why we even, care about the Torah in general, right? This is why also my father knew from a young age to take me to Mickey Carey, right?
Alav Shalom. Wow.
Yes. He didn't have the chance to do it at a young age, so he made it his mission to, take myself and my brother to know the Torah like the way we're supposed to know it, right? And this is, to credit Hakham Faur, may he rest in peace. But to go into his life, okay? So as I know, he was born in Argentina. Just so you know, and I'm not sure if you know this, but I grew up in Mexico City, right?
Oh, okay.
And in Mexico City, a lot of the rabbis are imported, call it, from Argentina, okay? The Argentinians have a very, weight to them, right? They have in Latin America even, they have a certain personality, style. Yes, correct. And your father always reminded me of like the Argentinian. You know what I'm saying? That's what they are. They're opinionated. They say what they think in a certain way.
They have a European flair to them as well, right?
Yes. And so he was born in Argentina. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, who was his rabbis? What was his tell us a little bit about that.
And it's interesting, even before I get there, you said you were in Mexico City. Yeah. So the first place that my father went to, and I think he was around 17, and I keep hearing this story, and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Like when I was 17, I was trying to figure out how to, throw a proper jump shot. I don't know. It's like, say he was 17 years old, he left Argentina, he went to Mexico City. Yep. And I think he was the principal or the rabbi of some Jewish high school. And it just didn't make sense. So then years later, I lived in Israel, and a person sees my father. He's from Mexico City. He says, Hakham. And I'm looking, how do you know my father? He's like hugging and this. So he says he was his student when my father was 17 years old in Mexico City. So I said, okay, the story is real, right? Yes. So it's funny. So you were in Mexico City.
And many rabbis do come from there. I do remember that his first few teachers, correct me if I'm wrong, were Hakham Suli,
Yeah.
Hakham Freue.
Yes,
Is that
correct.
right?
Correct.
I actually used to take classes briefly with Hakham Suli's grandson in
Wow.
Mexico City. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So you said at 17 he left Argentina. Is
Yeah,
that right?
yeah.
And most of his initial education was
Yeah, so
from
here's
there.
so my father, when he was very young, so they didn't live in the center of the Jewish community. So imagine like you have Brooklyn, you have the Ocean Parkway area. So let's just say that my father lived, let's say, in Fifth Avenue, right? Now, Fifth Avenue in the 70s, there weren't a lot of synagogues. They had some synagogues in the area, but it wasn't like the center of the community. Now, what happened is because he was far away from the Jewish schools, so he went to a regular public school. And my father says, alav shalom, that this was actually, in a sense, to his benefit. Because what happened is a few things. Number one, his father, he brought him a private teacher. It was an Ashkenazi. I think his name was Konstantinyevsky. Moshe Konstantinyevsky, something like that. And he used to teach him how to read Hebrew properly, but in Sephardic pronunciation. Right, it's Ashkenazi, but
Really?
give credit. Sephardic pronunciation.
Yep.
He taught him how to write Hebrew. He taught him how to write Chasil Kolmos. Now, my father's notes, if you look at my father's notes, all of his private writing,
Kolmos.
everything is in Chasil Kolmos. Nobody knows how to read it. You know, I forced myself to learn Chasil Kolmos because I wanted to learn how to read my father's Chidushim. So, like a lot of times, I open up his Perashat HaShavua book. He has a book that he uses for Perashat HaShavua, Shilai Mikra Ve'Hatargum, and he have the notes on the side. It's all in Chasil Kolmos. So he learned it from this private tutor. Now, had he gone to a regular school, he might not have learned the correct pronunciation.
One-on-one,
Exactly.
Yes.
Then another thing happened. Because my father realized that he wasn't in the center of the community, he had a yearning to study Torah. Now, he had to make decisions. So he started studying Torah with Rabbi Abe. And on Shabbatot, he would walk to the Knis, very far walk, I think an hour and a half walk to the Knis. Yeah.
Wow.
Then he ended up studying Torah with Rabbi Freue. Now, again, it was all private. With Rabbi Abe, it was a public class. But when he went to Rabbi Freue, I want to tell you the story. So, my father's grandfather, alav shalom, Yoseph Faur, apparently he knew Rabbi Freue. So he had that connection. So my father's grandfather advised my father, you want to study Torah? Go to Rabbi Freue. Okay. Rabbi Freue was a Talmid in Damascus of the famous Rabbi Hakham Faur. Rabbi Hakham Faur, the author of Penei Yitzhak. Okay, so my father's a young, I think 14 years old, something like that. And he takes a long bus ride. He says it was like an hour and a half bus ride to finally get to the house of Rabbi Freue. He gets to the house, he sits down in the living room, and he tells him, I want to study Gemara. Okay, he wants to study Gemara. So Rabbi Freue says, no problem, take out the Perashat HaShavua, Perashat Vayeseh, Yaakov Be'er Shava, Vayelech Harana. So my father's like, he says, I want you to read for me. Okay, so my father sat down. Now, fast forward decades later, I'm sitting down with my father in the living room. Forget the story in Argentina. He takes out an old book. It was Perashat Vayeseh Yaakov. So he takes out an old book, and it was actually a Gemara. We were studying Gemara, Masechet Berachot, Kesad Mevarichim. And the book had like stains on it. You know how old books have stains? So my father, as we're reading the Gemara, I'm looking at the stains, and I say, what are all these stains here? He says, I used to study Gemara with Rabbi Freue. Now, when you studied Gemara with Rabbi Freue, you were in such awe, in such yir'ah, that I was sweating, and the sweat from my brow, it would go on the pages, and here you have the stains on the Gemara pages. And then he told me how when Rabbi Freue tested him on Perashat Vayeseh, it was Perashat Vayeseh Yaakov, and he was sweating, and like, what if I fail? Baruch Hashem, my father read the Perashat well, and then Rabbi Freue took him as a Talmid.
It's amazing.
And he introduced my father to the Sephardi Shita of studying Gemara, which at that early stage, meaning if you're just beginning to study Gemara, the first thing they teach you is the structure of the sugya.
Surata Dishmata, we call this, right?
Yeah,
is that right?
Surata Dishmata.
Yes.
So that's the first thing. Learn how to think, how to understand, conceptualize the Gemara in a structured, intelligent manner. Meaning, there's another shita. Let's say the opposing shita is okay. Let's today it's daf yomi. Let's study daf yomi, which by the way I love it that everybody
call it
said it.
ayun maybe like this. Is that right? The other shita is not.
No,
it's
no,
not.
it's parallel shita.
Got it.
Because the parallel shita is basically go through the go through the daf yomi, and the problem, let's say from the Sephardic perspective as well. What did you just study? There was a sugya here. What was the beginning of the sugya? What was the end of the sugya? Do you know? Because if you can't answer that question, then okay, you can't answer the next question. What was the purpose of the sugya?
Structure of it.
So first you have to know there's a beginning and end to every sugya. Then you have to know that not every sugya just has a beginning and an end, but let's say there could be a sugya with 3 parts, for example. Or maybe 2 parts, or meshuleshet. And then you begin to understand the concepts and ideas better, because once you structure it in your mind, you know how to structure it. Now you know how to read the sugya. That's why they brought the second part after the first part. That's what the second part was doing. The first part was missing something. It solved the problem, but then it presented another problem. And then the second part comes to present it. So you begin to become, you know what it's like? You ever see the periodic table?
Yes.
Okay, so periodic table, if you don't know the Surat Hadishmatita, you're just looking at a rumbling of letters, H, He, or what's the next one?
And
Lithium,
certain
beryllium.
orders, right?
But all you see is like these letters and numbers, and you're just reading H, He, C, C, O, whatever. But then when you understand, wait, no. This square has a letter H. You see that one over there that represents its 1 proton. You see there's another one that represents, there is no neutron.
The order is there for a reason.
So now you begin to learn how to decipher the code of the periodic table, right? So you look at oxygen. Oxygen has an 8 next to it, 8 protons. It can have a various number of neutrons. Sometimes it has 1, sometimes it has 2. So now you become familiar, and now you understand what's actually going on. And that was a great chidush for my father. So when my father studied Gemara, he studied it in the authentic Sephardic tradition.
Yes.
Now, later on, because he had the first level of studying Surat HaDishmateta, he was able to go to the second level, which is Ayun Sepharadi, which is where you make a more intensive study in Gemara. And then finally, you have the last level, which is called Halakha. That's like poskim like Harambam, or other great Chachamim who had erudition in the entire Torah from A to Z.
Wow.
So you need to have the Surat HaDishmateta, and only then can you build up and get to the ladder and more.
And this is how they studied back in Damascus, you're saying? And also in Halab? That's how it was studied?
So I once asked my father about that exact question.
Yeah.
I said, when you said with the Rabbi Abe, did he actually know that he was talking about structures and so on? And he said, he said for him it was just a natural thing.
It was just obvious. It was,
it's not like he might have used the word structure. Okay, my father was a professor. He was a man of tremendous knowledge. So, okay, Rabbi Abe might not have never ever heard the word structure.
Yes.
But this is the way they studied. When they approached the text, they're saying, what's happening here? There's a bunch of words. How do I break it up?
That's how they studied Gemara. Meaning for him it was natural. It was just, this is the way. And that's it.
Yeah. Look, you read the Torah, right?
Yes, I do, yeah.
And by the way, I have to say, I remember many, many decades ago.
Yes.
I don't know when it was, maybe the 80s.
Yeah.
You were once in Bet Torah for Mincha, and your father was sitting next to my father, and you were reading the Torah. I said, wow, nice reading. You had a very nice voice. I remember that.
I really enjoy it. Yes, thank you.
So let's look at the Torah. So you have Ma'arich Talha Atnach, Ma'arich Talha Sof Pasuk, Shofar Olech Zakir Katom. It's structuring and organizing the information on the page.
That's right.
So we have it naturally.
I couldn't imagine myself doing it without the ta'amim. Okay?
Yeah, exactly. So we have ta'amim.
This is how we read it.
And what is the ta'amim telling you? It's telling you Bereshit, Tarha, Bara, Elohim, right? Et Hashemayim,
the right stops, the right, yes.
It's an idea. Look at that pasuk. What is that pasuk teaching you? Well, now because you know the beginning of the pasuk, the end of the pasuk, I can think of the pasuk. So pasuk is not teaching me about light, because that's 2 pasukim forward, right? So what is the pasuk teaching me?
Yes.
It's not teaching me Tov Avo. That's the next pasuk.
Correct.
So it's teaching me Bara Elohim et Hashamayim ve'et haaretz. What does that mean? What does word Bereshit mean?
And how it's broken up. And
which
words go with which ones.
Exactly.
Like that, of course.
So it's the same thing in Gemara. So you study your sugya in the Gemara.
Same kind of thing. I understand. So that's what Hameli Alfrewe. Okay.
Yes.
Now, so at age 17, you said.
Yeah.
He moves from Argentina.
Yeah.
Is it because you wanted to continue his studies? Did he come to America to what was his goal?
Okay, so there was an Ashkenazi rabbi in Argentina whose name I forget. And my father once met him. An Ashkenazi rabbi took a liking to my father. He saw that my father was a prodigy, really tremendous. Yeah, no. So he told my father, why don't you go to America? There's a yeshiva there, Rabbi Aaron Kotler. And my father got enamored by the idea, and he heard about how they're studying Torah, Yomam Balayla Lo Yishbotu, and he was very enamored by that idea. He went to the Eliyahu Suli, and he says, what do you think? So, the Eliyahu Suli was a traditional, Syrian rabbi, but he was a gentleman. So my father remembers that he can tell that Eliyahu Suli wasn't crazy about the idea. He did not want my father leaving Argentina. But he was a gentleman, so he wouldn't say a bad word. By the way, the old Sephardi Hachamim, they wouldn't speak a bad word about another rabbi.
Correct.
They wouldn't speak a bad word about another rabbi.
Also, he has a young man coming to him, and he has the passion to go. You want to go? Go, right? Yeah. That's the way you have an idea and you really want to do it?
He wouldn't say a word. But my father can sense that there was something there. Okay. He ended up going to Mexico, from Mexico City. He ended up in Yeshiva Gedola in Lakewood. Now, to get to Yeshiva Gedola in Lakewood back then, it was the first...
Gevoha, it's called.
Yes,
This is the original one.
The original one.
Yep, BMG.
Yes. Rabbi Aaron Kotler was back then the Rosh Yeshiva.
That's right.
And my father had to undergo a test, Pekiut, Gemara, this, that. I think it was the first Sephardi ever accepted that. I could be wrong, but I believe that it's a historical fact that he's the first Sephardi that ever got there.
Yes.
Okay. Whatever it is, maybe not, maybe yes. Be that as it may, he immediately got admitted to the high-level class, had a private class with Rabbi Aaron Kotler, and Rabbi Aaron Kotler loved my father. He saw in him like a gaon, and because in the first class that my father went to, Rabbi Kotler, Alav Shalom, he had like a whole shiur, Tosafot, Poskim, Nishba, everything, tremendous pikyut. And my father came to Rabbi Kotler at the end of the class, and he asked him a single question, which kind of, it presented Rabbi Kotler with such a challenge that he devoted the whole next class to answer my father's question.
Wow.
And Rabbi Kotler loved my father because he saw that my father was a gaon. He was just, so my father, he was in this yeshiva in Lakewood. He was loving it, having a great time. But he began to compare the Sephardi Shita to the Ashkenazi Shita. And I'm not saying this in a negative way. I'm not saying this in a negative way, but in his mind, he found that the Sephardi Shita was much more organized, much more methodical, much more insights into the Gemara.
The other one lacked that structure that he was used to.
Exactly. The other one lacked that structure, lacked that organization.
The ta'amim call it, right?
The ta'amim,
right?
exactly.
Yes.
So something happened when my father was in yeshiva, and this was very important. Somebody passed away in the area. This person who passed away, he had a big library of Sephardi books. Menorah Ma'or, the Ikarim, all these books. And he donated it to the yeshiva. Now these books, they didn't have a place in the main hall in the yeshiva. They put it in a house somewhere, one of the dormitories. And my father had this entire library of Sephardi Hachamim from A to Z. And he used to go there at night after the shiurim were done, and he would sit down in that room, and he'd pull out books from the library. He put one book after another. My father had tremendous memory. He'd read a book, remember it, put it away. That's it, he has it. Take another book, read it, put it away. That's it, he has it. And so, book after book after book after book. So he would spend late nights studying all these old books.
Wow.
And that's how he developed Bekiut in the old sources of Sepharad. He was very young.
Yes.
He was very young, but oddly enough, it was in Kotler's yeshiva, Alav Shalom Kotler's yeshiva, that he developed this Bekiut.
So he came to America with a goal to go to Lakewood, not to Brooklyn. Is that right?
No.
His first place he wanted to get to was Lakewood.
I believe that is correct. I believe that when he came to America.
Very interesting. So then, how does he end up in Brooklyn? How he wanted something more Sephardic? Is that what it was, or?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe some of the people who were involved. I have some names I can mention later. I don't have the answer, but I believe that after his experience in Lakewood, this is what I believe, with no evidence, not that I spoke to him, after his experience in Lakewood, he wanted to return to his roots.
Yes, of course.
And I think he came to this community.
This was in the 60s, is that right?
I think
About?
it might even be the 50s.
50s, late 50s.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was actually late 50s.
Wow.
And I think there was a synagogue called Ahiezer.
Here's a sure.
Right? And he started some Torah Center. I believe it was Avenue P on West 3rd or West 4th Street. I don't know if that makes
This
sense.
is the
Again,
original Ahiezer.
right. So let me tell you
Yes.
what I used to study Torah with my father all the time. And because I studied Torah with him all the time, I always took it for granted, his life. So a lot about what I know from those days is from other people who tell me or who told me. And therefore, I don't have a tremendous knowledge, but I do know a few things.
So as I have understood, and I have heard, this group that you're talking about had current rabbis in our community. Right?
Yeah.
I think Rabbi Moshe Shammah was in that group.
Yes.
I believe even Rabbi Murray Maselton, who later on became more on the black side, right?
Yes, correct.
And many others.
Yeah,
right?
Rabbi Zafrani, I believe also.
Yep.
There's a famous picture with everybody's around the table.
Yes.
You see all these older rabbis. Now they're older rabbis. Back then they were young men.
Yeah.
And what happened is when my father came to the community, there wasn't a lot of Torah classes. It wasn't like today where you go to Shari Sion. I don't know.
It was a new community. Meaning we had just come from
They
Syria.
just came from. They were in Bensonhurst. They were coming now to the Shari Sion area. So my father tells me that when he came to this community, there weren't a lot of classes.
Yes.
There weren't hardly any classes, and there was a lot of Chilul Shabbat. People used to come to Knesset in the morning.
We were in our infancy.
Right.
The community was in its infancy, right?
Right.
It was still that time where people had to work.
Yeah.
Work came first, right? Always, your father always said, Parnasa comes first.
Yes.
Right? And he's from those days.
Right.
So, but to me, it's very interesting how that initial class, right, had rabbis which today, right, we would call all the way to the left.
Yes.
And all the way to the right.
Correct.
In the same class. To me, that's
Correct.
super interesting.
Yes.
And how that came about and why they went to the right and to the left is a whole another topic. But it's interesting that they all studied together back in those days.
Did. So what happened is my father started organizing Torah classes, and apparently, what I heard is that a lot of people weren't happy about it because my father was telling the young men not to go to work on Shabbat, and some of the parents, the older generation, they were like,
They have to survive, right? They have to survive,
right?
Yeah.
And I'm not putting them down, chas v'shalom, but like my father was viewed as kind of like a black hat, like bringing people, they're studying Torah,
like Mekarev,
exactly. So back then he was kind of perceived as a black hat. So it was Mickey Carey, Billy Mizrahi, Dennis Dweck, Dolim in the community, Aliyah Shalom, right?
Yes.
Real Dolim, Dennis,
Of course.
So we know the stories. Rabbi Zafrani, Murray Maselton. So all these, right, they met. But I'll tell you in a moment about Murray Maselton.
Yes.
There's a story about him, how my father brought him in. It's an own story. I'm not going to say it now, but it's a very funny story. Off the record, I'll tell you the story.
Yes.
He did not want to study Torah, and my father really, literally, physically brought him into Bet Midrash. Let's leave it at that. Now, years later, Murray Maselton
I believe it.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe it.
Years later, Murray, he became a little more, let's say, what we call black hat. Okay. And I remember he had a yeshiva called Mikdash Melech. And people couldn't believe this when I would tell this to them. But, so he was on kind of already, that was decades later, and we know that there were some attitudes about my father. So I used to go to Mikdash Melech. I just wanted to study Torah. I didn't care about politics. So I saw a nice yeshiva. This is in the 80s. And I'm looking for a place to study, just to sit down and open Tul Bet Yoseph, whatever, I want to study. So, nice, it wasn't far from my house. I used to walk to Mikdash Melech. And then Murray Maselton sees me. I didn't know who he was. So he finds out, you're Rabbi Faur. Your father's Hakham Faur. He loved me. He used to come over next to me. His son used to come. He loved it. He was so happy. He was so mabsut that I was in his yeshiva studying Torah. He knew I wasn't a black hat.
Yep.
He knew I'm not going to become a black hat. But he was so happy to see me there. Just have to put that out there because I know there's a lot of whatever.
Of course.
But this is the
emet. One of the reasons for me doing this, and a lot, we've had these differences within our community. and within the Jewish world. And to remember where, specifically in this case,
Yeah.
where they started all in one group, in one class,
Yeah.
right? There's
Yeah.
no need for this, back and forth, or this,
Politics, yeah.
sinat hinam even. Call it sinat
Yeah.
hinam. That's the truth.
Yeah.
Because kulanu b'nei shahad nachnu, says
Yes.
in the last week's parasha. That's the truth,
Yes.
right? And it's important to know the history and
Yeah.
to know where we all come from, right?
Yeah.
And specifically in this case, where they actually studied together and they were
Yeah.
friends,
Yes.
in the late 50s or early 60s. So let's move on a little bit
Yeah.
from there. So he stays in Brooklyn for how long? Do you know about how long after that?
So I think there was some issues.
Okay.
And I'm not familiar with the exact nature, but apparently at first he was black hat, and I'm not sure how that all turned out. So my father, alav hashalom, decided to get a doctorate in the University of Barcelona,
Right.
on Semitic philology,
Yes.
which basically is Targum Ankel. I want to understand the grammar of the Targum Ankelos, like in a really strong way.
Yes.
And this would enable him also to understand the Gemara better and the right, because if you know the Semitic philology, you become a mamash baki.
In all the texts. No question about it.
I'll just give you a simple example.
Yes.
Like you have a word teko in the Gemara.
Yep.
So teko is like, okay, we're at a stalemate. And everybody says, so what does teko mean? It's an acronym for Tishbi, Yetares, Kushyot, V'ibayot, teko. Tishbi, Yetares, that when Elian Avi comes,
He's gonna
solve a problem for us, which is very nice. Nothing wrong with that. But there's an actual meaning to teko. So teko, it's actually an abbreviation of the word tekum. Let the problem stand.
We're going to leave it there.
Let
the problem
this is
stand.
a problem.
Right. We're not deciding.
Right, so it's
We're
nice.
not deciding.
Yeah, and
let it be what it is.
Yeah, and there's a lot of words in the Gemara.
I love that.
Right. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't mean tishbi. I guess if the problem is standing.
We always gave it Rashi Tevot.
Exactly.
Things. We always gave things Rashi Tevot.
Right.
Also,
right.
He wanted to know what the actual word meant.
Yes.
But that doesn't necessarily negate the Rashi Tevot of the word.
Exactly.
Both, right?
That's right. So he studied Semitic philology in the University of Barcelona.
So after these, let's say, little issues, call it, right? And by the way, I met your dad myself, and he wasn't a man he spoke his mind, right? He wasn't, when he thought something, he would say it, and he would say it in the way a Hakham says it, right? He would say it straight.
Okay.
So I'm sure that's maybe what led to whatever issues these were in his young age.
Okay.
And so he ended up deciding, I want to take this serious. I'm going to go and study, you said, Aramaic in the University of, is it Salamanca or Barcelona?
I believe it was the University of Barcelona where he got his PhD.
Okay, Barcelona.
And we can confirm that later.
As I have understood, he was the first Sephardic Jew to graduate from this university since the Gerush Sepharad. Is that right?
Yes, correct. Mm-hmm. He was the first Sephardi since the Jews were expelled from Spain to get the PhD.
And besides that,
in this university,
I've also heard what I knew. There was a man there by the name of Alejandro Diez Macho.
Yes,
is that right?
he was one of his teachers.
Had a very close relationship with Hakham Faur.
So I want to tell you that in a moment about that.
Yes.
I just want to get back to my father
go ahead,
and there were some issues in the community, which I'm not very, again, I don't know the dynamics, 50s, different time period, but I really know what happened.
Okay.
And I want to tell you what happened because it's obvious. Yeah. Okay. I knew my father. Okay. Yes. So there's a Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, Daf Lamed Gimel, and it describes, I think it's Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Bet, and it describes what happened to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai after he left the cave. He was in the cave for many, many years studying Torah with his son. And, finally they realized that the original Roman decree, the Roman emperor, was changed and they can leave the cave. And when they leave the cave, they begin to start fires. The son is starting fires. The father's putting them out. They see a person holding 2 hadassim. Why do you need 2 hadassim? Onek Shabbat. It's going to be Shabbat when I'm on a nice spell. So why 2 hadassim? Take 1 hadas. Really? What's the issue? Okay, so he has 2 hadassim. Let him take 10 hadassim. No, he says, Had keneged shamor, zachor, had keneged shamor. The bottom line is, these people were at such a high level of Torah in Kedusha that there's no way that they leave the cave and they don't start fires. it's going to be fires. There's no
Makes
way.
sense.
Now, I wasn't at my father's level, but I was at a level where I could understand what happened.
Yep.
And when a person is immersed in Torah, in Yirat Shamayim, and his neshama is like a flame of fire.
Fire.
And then you come out here, America. Yeah, I don't know, Lamit, how many shots?
Brooklyn.
All right, I don't shout to over here. Okay, whatever. And it's like it's fire.
Yes.
Like, and I don't have time for your nonsense. Don't give me nonsense.
Yes.
Like no real
He
Hakham.
was a no BS kind of person.
No.
Absolutely, yes.
And now he was young. Now
Yes.
the deal Azal, he's the one who started the fire because he was young. When Bishimon Bar Yochai was older, he's putting out the fires. So my father, when he was young, he was going to be
So in his
Azal.
20s, right? It was in his
Exactly.
20s. So he had that energy we have in our
Fire.
20s. Fire.
Fire.
Yes.
Then when he was older, he was more like the
It
Bishimon
was
Bar
much more
Yochai.
idealistic, more, of course, we were
Understanding.
all in our 20s.
Yes.
And you see the world in a different way than when you're in your 40s. You know,
Right.
I turned 40 and you change as you go. You have kids also.
Right.
And you understand the world a little better.
Right.
So
I suspect that my father, when he came to the community, he started fires, but they were good fires. They were fires of Torah.
So
And he really transformed the community. I mean, the original generation of rabbis were all his Talmidim.
This is
Black
what we
hats,
said before.
white hats, middle of the road, Mickey Carey,
on that one table.
Dennis Dweck. They were
All on that one
his
table.
Talmidim. So
Yep.
he started a fire. And at first, I'm just going to finish
Go
this
ahead.
one
No,
sentence.
take your time.
The fire is hot. It burns. Like what's happening here? But the fire of the Torah brings life.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
he transformed this community. When he came here, by the way, my mom was the only rabbanit in the community who covered her hair. No woman covered their hair back then.
Wow.
And now today, it's like you look at the
Everywhere. It's
everywhere.
everywhere. Yes,
exactly.
yes.
And I'm not putting down people who
Thank
don't.
God.
It's not the point. Not the point. But the point he brought a certain, the idea of mikveh. He used to teach about Taharat HaMishpacha, and he got people to do. He used to teach about Shabbat. He got people to be Shomer Shabbat. He transformed the community. I want to say one more story, and then I want to get to your
No,
thing.
go ahead.
This
Go
is a
ahead.
great story. There's a scientist. He used to work at NASA, and I don't want to say his name again. I just don't. Okay, whatever. He used to work in NASA, and this is in Sha'arei Zion in the 50s when my father just got here, and he was giving a class. I don't know if it was the original building or a house. I don't know what. My father's giving a class, Shabbat. Maybe it's the 60s. Okay, and then he goes there. I just know the story because he told me the story. So this guy is a scientist. He works in NASA. Now people are saying that according to the Torah, no one can reach the moon. Yeah, the story was in the 60s.
Okay.
According to the Torah, nobody can reach the moon. Hashamayim, shamayim la Hashem. Okay, whatever. Okay. All right. Fair enough. So he's a scientist. He was working on sending people to the moon. Okay, so you can fool me and tell me the whole thing was a put on. I never worked on putting people on the moon. You can't fool the guy who works in NASA.
Yeah.
He was working with the people who sent.
With his own eyes, he's seeing it. Yes.
Exactly. He's the one who worked on the rocket ship. Okay. So he was very cynical about Judaism, whatever. But he was in Sha'arei Zion. He has a strong family here. And he's walking by the room where my father's giving a class. And as he's walking by, he hears my father speaking. And he's struck. And he stops.
Wow.
And he listens. And my father, Haziro Tobitshuva. This person married a person Shomer Torah Mitzvot, his wife. He was Shomer Torah Mitzvot. The children Shomer Torah Mitzvot. Now, if it wasn't for my father, a lot of people like this would have according to the Torah, you can't really reach the moon. I guess either I'm stupid or Bar Minan, something else is wrong. I mean, something is wrong here. And my father stopped that nonsense. He gave people the opportunity to continue, not just to continue, but to enter the world of the Torah and become connected with the Torah and with the Mitzvot and with Am Yisrael. And that's my father's zechut.
Of course. And
Yeah.
if I could just add something about that topic, and especially that initial class, and I know there was, you're speaking about from your, from your and your father's perspective, which were the people who lived it. But I've seen myself a book that told the story in another way. But I do want to say one thing about this book.
Yeah.
Okay. If the person is not mentioned by name,
Yeah.
right? That's your first clue.
Yeah.
Right? When they're not mentioned by name, right? Already they didn't say the name properly.
Yeah.
So why would the story be correct?
Right.
Already the name, they didn't say the name, right?
Yeah.
So and really, to me it's really habal to have this kind of disunity, right?
Yeah.
where we can't even say a name. To me, that's really nonsense. And we spoke before the interview about this ahdut thing, which really is like the way your son said it.
Right.
And after the whole October 7th thing, I think ahdut is really it should be in the forefront of first of all our community and of course Am Yisrael, right?
Right.
But it got to start in our community.
Right.
So it's good you're saying these stories, okay? And it's good you're kind of like setting the record straight. Because there's a lot of misinformation, and this is why one of the reasons why I wanted to sit down and speak to you, to hear it from your mouth, and to hear it from the son of the man, right? So let's move forward a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yes.
So now he ends up in La Universidad de Barcelona, right?
Yes.
And so the first Sephardic Jew to graduate from there.
Yes.
In
PhD.
500 years.
PhD. They got a
PhD.
Right. They got a PhD there. Yeah.
Now he learns Aramaic. So at what point does he get married, Rabbi? When was that happen?
So that was in the mid '60s.
Okay.
And he was. I think it was in the middle of his study. So he went to Haifa for one summer. You know, they have the summer intercession, and he wanted to visit his family. He heard that he has family in Haifa, and my mom is Kohen, right? Yes. And but there was like some family connection, and he ended up there, and he met my mom, and they got married, and then they moved to somewhere next to Barcelona because he was continuing his studies, and then when he got his PhD, he was already married, right? He was already married, and you know, after that is.
I'll tell you one story I remember because I studied with him when he was already older, right?
Yeah.
When he would come to Deal in the summers, which were great summers, and it was great spending time with him also. But he would sometimes, interrupt the classes for a little bit to say stories from Barcelona days, right? And he said that correct me if I'm wrong with the story. I might have it wrong, but that they would be walking, right, and some Christian would be there, and there's Yeshu's all over the place, right? So you see Yeshu, right? And they would tell him, "Don't you think that's beautiful? Isn't it beautiful the way he looks, right?" And your father would say, to us, we think God, because he would be like this, the Yeshu, right, has underarm hair. Wait, it's not. He didn't shave his underarms. He would have these kind of, the responses, right?
Yes.
To me, that's the Argentinian, coming out of him.
Yes.
And besides that story, he had many other stories.
Yes.
Of the same way. I don't know if I said it right. But
so I think you were on the right. It rings a bell.
You remember? Okay.
I wasn't there. I don't think I was there. So my father tells me that in Spain in the winter, the sunset is very early, similar to New York, maybe
like here,
earlier.
Yes.
And he was studying, one of the professors was Alexander Diez Macho.
Alejandro Diez Macho.
He was a very powerful person in Spain. Apparently he was a secretary to the Pope back then.
Oh,
so
wow.
really very, in Spain was like,
of course.
Now, a devout Catholic, no doubt. I mean, secretary to the Pope. So what happened is my father had to pray mincha. And my father told Diez Macho, he said, "Listen, I'm an observant Jew, and I apologize, I have to interrupt in the middle of the class. I'm going to have to leave to pray mincha," because the classes would go on for hours in the university. And Diez Macho, when the time came, he told the class, "We're taking an intercession now." He gave my father the keys to his personal office, and he said, "You're going to pray mincha in my office." And my father would pray mincha in his office. He respected the fact that my father was observant and was shomer Torah u'mitzvot. It actually inspired this individual because he saw a certain emunah that he himself was yearning for. But when you're in a situation where people don't have emunah and suddenly you see the real thing, it's inspiring.
It's interesting that a Diez Macho would know Aramaic to that level.
Right.
I mean, was he? He knew all languages. I mean, could we know a little? What do we know about this? I know he was a real scholar.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I don't know why, but I know that many of the ancient Christian texts were written in Aramaic.
Yes, I got it.
So I suspect that because of that, he studied it and knew it well. So he was He was the head of the Semitic philology department in University of Barcelona.
So now he gets so he gets married now, and then he comes back to Brooklyn. Is that
Yes,
right?
yes.
So you were born in Brooklyn,
I was born in Buenos Aires.
Buenos Aires.
Yeah, because he knew he had a sense that he was going to have a son.
Yes.
He wanted the Brit Milah to be with his parents and the knees
a lot of
and
sense.
everything. So
you were born in Buenos Aires, and then as a young kid
I was basically raised in Brooklyn.
in Brooklyn.
Yes.
I understand. Okay, great. Now, and then he comes back to Brooklyn, and he is, I think, teaching in Sha'ar Sion. Is that right? Is that where he?
Yeah, I think originally, and here's where the bridge between what I actually experienced and what people told me.
Okay.
So this is now what people told me. We're not quite.
Okay.
It could be that I was alive already, but I remember being in Sha'ar Sion as a young boy, and yeah, we used to go there all the time. And my father used to give classes there, and some of the rabbis. So here's what happened.
Yes.
So after my father got his PhD, and this is important to understand the story. So my father got the PhD, and now he wants to know what he's going to do with his career. And he went to the famous the Solapul. He met the Solapul in Jerusalem, and the Solapul told my father, why don't you go to the Jewish Theological Seminary, become a professor of Talmud there? That's like you're natural, you know Gemara, you're a scholar, you're this, you bring the Sephardic approach. So my father was unsure because he wasn't familiar with the JTS. While the JTS was a conservative university, my father didn't know what values they represented. So he went to Hakham Abadi. Right? He went to Hakham Matlub. He says, listen, I don't know what to do. I also have the option of going to Yeshiva University. Should I go to Yeshiva University? Should I go to Jewish Theological Seminary? So Hakham Matlub told him, listen, you can go to Yeshiva University, but there's a lot of politics there. It's not for you. It's going to interfere with your ability to be a scholar. That's what Hakham Matlub told my father. And I think what he was alluding to, and I never asked Hakham Matlub, but I never asked my father, back then, a Sephardi in a university like YU might not be appreciated for his Sephardic studies.
Love it.
Right? So it was Hakham Matlub's way.
And you see two things also, going back to what you said about Hamel Freeway when he asked him that question, right?
He asked him Suli,
right? The Sephardic approach of, and his also his Kabbalah Talmidei Hachamim. Now that you brought up Hamatlub, also, may he rest in peace, was a great Talmid Hachamim.
Yeah.
So as I have understood and I have heard again from others, he got a semicha from Hamatlub. Is that right?
So so before we even go there,
go ahead.
I want to finish that story because, and the reason I want to finish the Mechila that I'm in,
go ahead,
is because this was an issue of contention.
Yes.
So, my father's trying to push towards YU, and Hakham Matlub is saying no, JTS.
Yes.
And then Hakham Matlub told my father the following sentence: if I was in your shoes, I would be teaching in JTS. Now you have to understand. The teachers in JTS, the professors of Talmud, were all Orthodox people. 90% of the teachers in the JTS were Orthodox back then. Meaning it's not like going there was somehow, So, but my father asked from a halachic perspective, and he said, absolutely mutar. You're not going there to teach Christianity, Christian value. You're going there to teach Torah to Jews who want to study Torah.
That was the one issue of contention.
So
when it came to the mahloket,
then when my father came to the community in the 60s, and now he started to get classes, and his classes were incredibly successful. I mean, it was like, he'd go to Sha'ar Sion.
Yep. 200, 250 people. This is what I heard.
Yeah.
Yes.
And those people came at the expense of other classes that they could have been going to, but didn't. Just to give you some of the psychology behind.
Unbelievable.
And then, they used to say he's black hat. You're taking the kids away from the business on Shabbat. Now they were saying, oh, he's conservative.
Wow.
And they accused him of being conservative.
Going back to that, really, when it comes to when those games start being played, right? And it's not really the Shem Shamayim. It ends up being just an attack on the person, rather than seeing the issues for real, right? You're attacking the person for whatever other reason, right, that you might have,
right.
Be it kabod, be it chokhmah, be it whatever it is that they had in mind, right?
Yeah.
But so why don't you just go back for a second to Hamatlub, right? So his semicha was from Hakham Matlub Abadi? He
had semicha from several gedolim. In fact, give me a moment. Let me call. My son has the full array. Let me see if I can reach him. My son, God bless him, he sat down with my father to get the history. and he actually has a semicha. The actually semichat
list.
rabbanut. No, he has the actual semicha.
Yes.
He has the actual meaning in the frame,
diploma, the whatever,
actual
the
semicha,
piece of paper, right?
Right. So,
but to me, the one that's important, I think, as a community member and as knowing who the man was, Hamatlub, right?
Yeah.
Who still till this day, when we say Ashkala or Hamatlub, they still do it in all the knesses.
Yeah.
We stand up, right?
course.
Hamatlub was a gadol. Right?
Yeah, no. Hakham Faur.
And also his books are not really studied, but his teshuvot were so clear.
Yeah, no. Hakham Faur, but I just want to say.
Yes, go ahead.
I don't care what anybody says. When I read a Sheila from Magen Ba'adi, I am in heaven. I feel like I'm in a Bet Midrash with Gedolei, Chachmei Halab, and Damasek, and Sefarad. And like Mamash, you feel like this is the way they study Torah.
Organized,
just
clear,
you know what?
to the point. Like,
and it makes sense, and you're not just rambling, you're not trying to impress me.
Yes.
This posek is this, and this posek is that, and this posek. It's just, you know what? You don't see that in his Teshuvot. You don't see that.
Yes, I love it.
It's really, and you feel.
It's the old Sephardic style of what we were used to, right? That's how they wrote Teshuvot back then.
So this is here.
Okay.
He gets a couple of it. This is the primary one.
Okay. And by the way, all these diplomas, where are they now physically? They're still in grandma's house in Netanya? Oh, you have them. So we actually have the diplomas. If anybody wants to see them.
Hakham Yoseph Faur, right?
Okay, so Yoreh from Rabbi Suleiman Huji Abadi. Who was the one who gave Simichat? He was the teacher of Haram Mordechai Eliyahu, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it was him.
Wow.
Haram Mordechai Eliyahu.
Yes,
His teacher.
The chief rabbi he was.
By the way, I'll tell you about Haram Mordechai Eliyahu in a moment.
Yeah.
Okay, because you have to hear about that.
There's another one from, I think, with Bishak Dayan also, which isn't mentioned there.
Really, Rabbi Yitzhak Dayan, the one that he ended up in Sao Paulo after he was first in Israel, right? Because he was the Abedin or something in Syria. Rabbi Yitzhak Dayan.
I think that he has another
Bet
one
David, he was.
Also, Rabbi Ezra Atiyah, the
it was
teacher.
him.
Bet David, for sure.
It was him.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was him.
Also, Rabbi Ezra Atiyah, the teacher of Harav Yosef. He was a Rosh Yeshiva in Polat Yosef, and Harav Yosef
So
was a
he got
student.
several.
Rabbi Yaakov Ades, Rabbi Ovadia Hedaya.
Wow. Yeah, no, these are, what are you going to call them? Household names, right? People, great hachamim.
Yes.
Who, but me specifically, Hakham Faur really hits home for our community, right?
Yes.
And so I'm just trying to understand the time period for a second. He studied with Hakham Faur when he came back to. So once he's married and your mom is here and everything, so he had a one-on-one relationship.
It was a Tamil Haber. My father, a tremendous and respect and love. I think Dennis Dweck said the only time he saw my father cry was when Hakham Faur Abadi died, when the news came. Never saw my father cry.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
So he was the Tamil Haber. My father and Hakham Faur, they used to exchange Torah ideas, and Hakham Faur used to say about my father, something in Hebrew like young man with an unbelievable memory, something like that. Like he used to have arguments in halakha. They'd have arguments. My father, for example, Hakham Faur has a shiur where he says how on Chol HaMoed, if you meet certain conditions, you can shave.
I was gonna bring that up, by the way, because that audio is, I think, the only surviving audio of Hamatlub, maybe there was a few others, but anyway. That audio, the way he spoke, Hamatlub was unbelievable. Right? Hakelal Harishon.
Yeah.
And 3 words. Hakelal Hasheni. Right? You could do it. The way they spoke, so organized, like going back to what you said of the organization in the mind, right?
Yes.
So clear and to the point
as
well.
Exactly.
So then.
So he mentions my father. I want to tell you about the relationship. You're going to like this. So my father, and people think, my father, I don't want to say he wasn't a black cat.
Yep.
He was like, the halacha is this. I don't want to hear stories. Mm-hmm. So we had an argument with Hakham Faur about Shem and Chol HaMoed. Hakham Faur said, you can shave. My father says, no. Now here's the thing.
Mahloket.
Hachamim. Mahloket Hachamim.
Yes.
Now my father went to Hakham Faur.
Yeah.
He told him it was going to be Chol HaMoed. I don't know which one. My father was in Brooklyn now.
Yes.
He tells Hakham Faur, I know that you make Pesach, that it's one is allowed to shave.
For the businessmen.
Exactly.
Yes.
I'm asking you for permission to allow me not to shave. I don't want to be disrespectful to you.
Kavod Talmidei Hachamim.
Kavod Talmidei.
Yes.
This is the old Sephardim.
Of course.
They always had respect from each other. You would never hear one Hakham insulting another Hakham in public or even in private. There was no such
Or
thing as
even
that.
disrespect them by doing something
No,
that didn't believe was right.
exactly.
Yes, yes.
Exactly. And Hakham Matloub says, I'm giving you permission.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's the way it was. In,
Amazing.
yeah,
Amazing.
yeah, it's right, right.
Okay, so then we'll fast forward a little bit. So at that point, you said before that the classes were very successful, right? There are some documents that survived from that time that went around maybe a few years ago. Like we're in all these WhatsApp chats, right? I think there was like a little biography that was written about your father when there was whole mahloket happened about the JTS and him teaching there whether that's mutad or not mutad, and they wanted to maybe remove him from Sha'ar Sion. Could you go over a little bit, and also how old were you when this happened, and what your memory is of how that went down, etc.
Yeah. So I'm going to share with you a particular experience. So this was in the 80s. I was studying Torah in Israel. I think it was 1987. I decided I wanted to get some Michat Rabbanut, but I wanted to do it quietly. I didn't want to make a big deal. So really what I wanted the opportunity to study Torah. And I knew if I had to do some Michat Rabbanut, it would force me to really like, So there's like, there's a whole bunch of tests you have to take from the Rabbanut in Eretz Yisrael. I just did it all in like, in a rather short period of time. So I was studying Torah in Israel. I was in a kollel. I guess you would call it black hat, Sephardi kollel. And I remember, so they used to go to the kollel in the morning, and they always have like Yated Ne'eman, like a religious newspaper. And I remember one morning people like looking at me, and there's like murmuring in the kollel, and they're kind of like looking at me as I walk in, and like I didn't know what's happening. Now what was happening is in Sha'ar Sion, my father was getting 300-400 people in the middle of the week to a class, and some rabbis, they felt uncomfortable with that. I understand that it's a psychological reaction.
At Soferim.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Exactly. So, so apparently there was an effort to remove him, and then they went to rabbis in Israel, and the rabbi signed against him. Okay. And they had it in the newspaper.
Yes. Yated Ne'eman. Yep.
Yep. And I'm like, I'm not, I wasn't Gaon Hador, I wasn't like this. And I'm like, did any of these rabbis call up my father? The pasuk says, Shamoa ben Achefem,
Ushvatem
Sedek. Did anybody call up my father? All these big dolim, this Rosh Yeshiva and that Rosh Yeshiva, they all decided, they never spoke to my father. They never attended his classes. They don't know what he said, but they heard other people speaking. It's not even Lashon Hara, because Lashon Hara is truth. Other people saying, Mamash Dibara.
Yep.
So I'm like looking at, so I see there, the Yated Ne'eman there. Is this your father? I said, yeah. So at that moment, I realized that a lot of what's peddled as Judaism is actually farcical.
Wow.
Because I knew my father. When I was growing up, if somebody would be mekel in my maharonim, forget it. He'd be kicked out. There's no such thing as that. If I was studying Torah with my father, and my father thought I was being lightheaded while I'm studying Torah, forget it. He'd kill me. He'd kill me.
Yep.
And later on, I have to explain. No, I wasn't being lightheaded. I thought it was very interesting. You misinterpreted me.
Yes.
There was actually a ma'aseh she'haya kachaya.
Yes.
My father.
Yeah.
I never met, and I met a lot of rabbis, and I met a lot of people. My father's loyalty to the Torah, loyalty to Kudsha Berichu, was unparalleled. And I didn't know this because somebody spoke to me about Hakham Faur. I knew this because I was raised in his house as his only son.
Yes.
And when I saw that list of rabbis signing that letter, when not a single one of them called him up, not a single one of them investigated the matter.
Get the facts.
You take Dibara and you make a Pesach, a public letter.
Which, by the way, and I had conversations with my father about this, because, I always wanted to know, the story of why, how, what, and my reaction always was, you know, you have a man who's like you said, super serious about Torah, and is giving his life to it, not only to Torah, but to the community and to people, and what, right? You're giving your life, and then what comes to you? Yatid Ne'eman. And how could a person, I asked my father, I said, how could you survive that, right? I'm imagining it happened to me, let's say, right?
Right.
You know, what do you do?
Right.
Right, and honestly, you know, it's really habal that this happened, but these are tests that Borei Olam, I guess, sends
course.
to each of us, right? And like we spoke before this interview, right? Einstein during his time, Galileo during his time, the greats face a lot of pushback,
Right.
especially when they're bringing, you know, a topic forward, right? And doing a leap, let's say a quantum leap in whatever subject it is, and this is Torah, right?
Right.
They're going to face that kind of, you know, and it's in a way, Borei Olam, this is what I'm thinking, puts these kind of surin in your way to see if you're really committed, maybe. Who knows? This is my...
Okay, God did me a very big favor that morning.
Yes.
Because I immediately realized what I realized.
Yeah.
And I understood what happened. Mm-hmm. And since then, whenever I read a She'elah Tshuva of any Chacham, and even Chachamim that I respect immensely,
yes,
I'm reading it, and I'm analyzing it, and if I disagree, and I see something's wrong, Bechavod Rav, of course, with respect, with humility, I would explain why I disagree with this.
I've seen your videos of that.
Right? I don't care.
Them, yes.
I don't care. Great example, serving in the army.
Yes, sure.
Serving in the army. Since when did we see anywhere along the annals of Jewish history, and we have a lot of Jewish history to talk about, that somebody says, I'm studying Torah, and therefore I don't have to defend my life and the life of my children and the life of my wife and the life of your children. No, I'm studying Torah. You defend my wife, you defend my children. Where did we ever see this? I mean, it's unbelievable. Thank you. Pinechas, Gadol Hador, Pinechas Uliyahu Hanavi.
Yes,
he went.
Yes.
So that morning was a tremendous zechut that God did me a favor because He opened up my eyes and He told me, Abe, you have a brain, use it, analyze it. I have the Torah from my father. I studied Torah from many other people. I read many books on Torah. Use it. Use your mind. Don't be afraid. Lo taguru b'penei ish.
Yes, of course. Ki hamishpat leElohim hu.
Exactly.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. You know, and of course, during this time, he also, and just to go over a little bit of what he wrote, I think Golden Doves was around this time, right?
Yeah.
And he's coming out with these academic, like high level. I mean, if you read Golden Doves, I mean, you could read a sentence 10 times, and sometimes you just don't understand it, right? The words, you have to you have a dictionary with you and reread it with your understanding of the word. Yeah, and I know you have a lot on your YouTube channel.
Yes.
I think it was class 238, I believe.
Yeah, that was the
last one. Yes, I know.
Rashi Tevot Rachel.
Bebakal Manea.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So I guess they're seeing this come out, and to be honest, and this is one thing I a lot of times point out. A rabbi's judged, I would say, in history based on what they come out with, right? What was your output to Judaism, right? Like Harambam, why do we see him in such a high regard, right?
Yes.
Mishneh Torah, Kitab Siraj, right? Perush HaMishnayot, Moreh Nebuchim.
Yes.
He gave us a lekach tov, a real lekach tov. That's why he's Harambam, correct?
Yes.
I think same thing with your father. And by the way, Harambam also, I don't know if during his life, but after, right? Didn't they have all his books burnt, right?
Yes, in Barcelona.
So you see that the greats face this kind of pushback.
Yes.
Whether a lot of times when they're alive, and then I guess you see once they're no longer here. Now we see what is their contribution. What was their contribution to the world? And I think that your father and I really believe that we're going to see what his greatness was now, after his life. And really, but what does it say, right? Dibrehem hem zichronam.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that
right.
right?
We don't have that right. They would not have the maseva for the tzaddikim and the hachamim because they needed a maseva. Their words was they're the best. Exactly.
What better zecher
Yes.
than their teachings?
Yes.
So let's go back for a second. So now Shabbos Yonde is good. Now I believe as well they opened up a knis for him in Brooklyn. Is that right?
Yeah.
Was it
On
Bnei
Avenue?
Ishaq?
Yes, Bnei
Correct.
Ishaq.
Bnei Ishaq was supposed to be and was the knis of your father.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, there was for many years. My father's talmidim wanted to have a bet midrash, and they always wanted to have a synagogue, and some really fine members of the community. They started the knis for him, and they opened up the knis. And I'll tell you the way I understand what happened. I'll give you the full understanding. And because I'm a rabbi of the knis myself, right? So they started the knis. And there was some politics. There were some people in Shaddai Sion, didn't want it, did want it. Rabbis don't know the whole thing. I'll tell you the emet. Because there's always noise, but then there's God pulling the strings.
Yep.
So I'm giving you the God pulling the strings version. Okay? The noise is whatever it is. I don't even know what it was. You said boo.
It's just noise. Yes.
Whatever. Okay, whatever. There's all right. Any of the dynamics. Okay, whatever.
Yes.
I don't like your tie. Why are you wearing that tie? Don't talk about my tie.
Right.
Why are you wearing it? If I don't like it, you shouldn't be wearing it. Okay.
Don't look at it. Yeah. Go ahead.
Anyway, but then there's, as I said, okay. Here's what really happened. My father, alav shalom, Harini Kaparat Mishkavo, did not belong as a pulpit rabbi in the knis.
Okay.
He didn't. He just didn't. It's not for him.
By the way, I agree with that.
Right? It's like, what are you doing? He should be sitting down.
He was more than that. He was writing these books that he has, right?
Yeah. After he left the community, my father wrote some of his greatest books ever.
Yes.
His book on the Moreh Nebuchim is Matil al-Ayon, Homo Mysticus. I mean, it's just phenomenal.
This is
horizontal society.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
Peninim. These are real
Peninim. I mean,
yes.
he really,
yes.
he creates a vision of Judaism that is so appealing and so beautiful and so authentic at the same time. He'll tell you that the authentic version of Judaism is the most appealing and intelligent version of Judaism. And what a hidush.
Yep.
So, yeah. So what really happened is they wanted my father to be here, and they tried, and they're good people. The people involved, there was different people involved in building the synagogue for my father, and this, and Me'ah Shamayim.
Mina Shamayim. I was just going to say that. Really, Mina Shamayim.
Really?
Because had that not happened, right, we don't have Homo Mysticus, maybe. You don't know, right?
We don't.
Because a
we
lot
don't
of
have
times
it.
from our suffering
Yeah.
comes our best work, right? When we get over it, right? So it takes a little time to get over suffering, right? But once you do, then you have like a clear, I guess something happens in the mind where, that nehama, call it, from the suffering, right, brings out great stuff, like Homo Mysticus. So if you don't mind, Rabbi Abe, if you could give me one example of your father's derech halimud.
I think, you know what, the best way to understand my father is not derech halimud, because that would be a very involved thing. I want to just tell you a short story about my father, and I think this tells you what you need to know. Two short stories, I'm sorry. Number one, he was a little older. He had to go to the hospital, heart surgery, and he was very weak. And he was in the hospital on Sukkot, and it was the last day of Sukkot now. It's Hoshana Rabbah. He was in the hospital. He just got out. I think the surgery was on Chol HaMoed, or the beginning of Sukkot. It was very difficult. Today, Baruch Hashem, this is back in the 90s. So he was in the hospital for a week, but mamash in very bad shape. Thank God he got out. Hoshana Rabbah, he can barely walk. He was very weak. And he didn't sit in the sukkah. And it was cold outside. It was a cold Sukkot. And I remember it was before sunset, Hoshana Rabbah. He just got back home. The first thing he did, he put on his coat and he went to the sukkah and he sat down and he had a seudah and he wanted to make the mitzvah of Sukkot. And I'm like telling myself, why are you doing this? You're mista'er. You're choleh. You're patur
Patur,
me'asukah.
no question.
No. Just no. Wow. Okay. Then I want to tell you a positive story because there was a lot of politics I spoke about. So once Sha'arei Sion, I wanted to go to Sha'arei Sion. My father says, well, I said there's a Shirul, Rabbi Yoseph, and this and that. There's going to be another rabbi there who wasn't one of my father's main supporters. Okay. I don't want to say his name. Allah Yerhamo, but he wasn't one of my father's main supporters. He was friendly with Rabbi Yosef.
Yes.
And my father made it his business. And he told me, if you see this rabbi, I want you to be respectful to him. This rabbi was a teacher, I believe, in Magen David. I think he taught Ta'amim. But then he was a very well-known rabbi in Sha'arei Sion, one of the main rabbis. He says, if you see this rabbi, I said, why are you telling me this? He says, because I know, you know the politics, I know the politics, you know that this, whatever, rabbi said something, said some things.
Yeah.
He says, you have to respect people who study Torah.
That's it.
What a lesson. Zero politics. No politics. You're supposed to respect people who study Torah. But what about? And there's no what abouts for my father.
He always said, and I remember him saying that, because I would ask him all these questions. I had the pleasure of even driving into Starbucks sometimes. Like, he would call me just random, take me here, and I would love to spend time with him. And, I would tell him, some black hats say this, or this one said, Abraham, he used to say it all the time. He said, if it's not like that, so sometimes you got to ignore, right? Sometimes you have to ignore, right? For the sake of shalom, right? And I think in his older age, you see, I was in my 20s, right? So I was still this like idealistic, and it's the Harambam way, it's the Hakham Faur way, right? I was very takif on this, right? But now I'm a little bit older. I see a little bit more. This approach is much better, right? It actually helps you. You feel better.
Yeah, of course.
With that kind of approach, you're more calm. You're more in shalom, right?
Yeah.
Which is the best. That's why we end the Amidah.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Shalom.
Right, and
it's the best bracha.
קריאת שמע על המיטה, ריבונו של עולם, הריני מוחל וסולל לכל מי שהכניס מקניתותי או שחטא כנגדי. What a therapeutic thing. God, I forgive anybody who may have offended me. That's amazing. I don't need to see a psychologist.
Now it's not on your shoulders.
I know psychology bills. I have to pay for that. I'm okay. I'll pay for the dentist. I'll pay for the whatever. But I don't need to pay for the psychologist at this point.
So listen, it is a shame that the mahloket happened during that time, yes. But we're saying, now that we're looking back, right, 30 years later, right, we see it was all min hashamayim, right? And it was all to bring about these great works that he has.
Yes.
Right? Specifically, really, I think without Homo Mysticus, in our generation, you cannot read the Mona Nebuchim, I don't think.
Right.
Without that guide to the guide, we call it, right? It's the guide to the guide.
Yes.
Right? And I've studied with some of your father's students, other students, right? I haven't had the pleasure to sit with you for so long because you've been in Israel and whatever. But your father's students are, to me, the top Talmidei Chachamim, not only in this community, in the world, right? In the world. And I say this firmly, and to whoever I speak to, this is my truth, right? People could have their own truths, and that's fine. So let's talk a little bit about this new book, if you don't mind, Rabbi Abe.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about why it came. Listen, Horizontal Societies, I already had a copy of Horizontal Societies, that 2-volume thing. It had the appendices as a separate book, and the green one, right, which was the main text. Tell us a little bit about this new book.
So I'll tell you the genesis of this book.
Yes.
This book was, so here's what happened. My father, before he passed away, alav shalom, he wanted to reach out to Koren book publishers, because he had some books he wanted to publish. And I'm sitting with Joey, my son. My son was really instrumental in bringing this book out. I mean, it wasn't because of me, it was more because of him. And we're kind of sitting down, talking with my father. Do we know anybody in Koren? How can we do this? Like trying to think about it. It's not working. And Joe, what book were we talking to Jdeda about? You remember we wanted to reach out to Koren because we wanted to publish one of his books. Which one was that? Do you remember?
Which book were we talking about
Yeah.
Forbidden Meditations.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Forbidden Meditations. He wanted to publish that book.
And he allowed us to change the name, but we decided to keep it as
To
is.
keep it as is. Yeah. Right. Right.
Very good name.
Right. Right. The name of the book is Popular Essays on Unpopular Topics, something like that. Okay. All right. Anyway, so lo yatsa beyadenu. Lo yatsa beyadenu. We couldn't figure it out. Whatever, and then I came to America. Joy was in the army, and that was it. It was the thought. Then my father passed away. A few weeks after my father passed away, Corin reaches out to us.
Wow.
We heard about your father.
Wow.
We heard about his writings. We want to republish every single thing he ever wrote. He wrote over 100 articles, over 10 books. A lot of the books were never also, in addition to the 10 books that were published, books that were never published.
Wow. Wow.
So this is just the first volume. It's going to be, I think, 5 or 6 volumes. I don't remember. This volume by Hashgacha Peratit, it has exactly 1,492 pages. 1492.
Yes.
If I follow every number, 1492, that was just like,
Yeah.
If you look at the page, it says 1447, but that's not including like the little eyes at the beginning and all that. So 1492 is so funny. So in this book, we have that Forbidden Meditations. We have many, many books in this book, right? And we presenting it to the public in a way where we're organizing his books in a thematic way. So, for example, this volume has Horizontal Society, which is really a restatement of Judaism, based upon Harambam, the Gemara, the Geonim, Hakham Andalusia, right? We have Text in Society. Text in Society, I would say, is a sub or a derivative of Horizontal Society, even though it was written earlier. It was never published, by the way. It was never published. But the idea of text for Am Yisrael, we are the people of the book.
Yes.
What does that mean? How did it affect us as a people?
Yes.
Text in Society. Then he has even articles back in the 80s. He used to write articles in the Jewish press.
Yes.
Right? Some of those articles are here. So we organize these volumes according to theme. And if anybody wants to get this, you can get it in Eichler's.
So Eichler's, okay.
And
Amazon. I got mine on Amazon.
Oh yeah, I didn't even know that.
I got mine on Amazon.
Or you can get it on Amazon, I guess.
Yes.
Corin also, Corin Book Publishers. And I would say, go right to Forbidden Meditations. It's such a delightful book. It's beautiful. Because when you read that book, you understand Sephardic Judaism. I have no other way of putting it. And it's really an easy book to read. Some of the other books are a little more difficult and challenging, right?
A lot of times they say, where do you start? Let's say you want to read Hakham Faur, where do you start? And you've said this, and other of his students, like Hamaron, Moshe Maimon, they say you start with Horizontal Societies. That's just, like you said, it's kind of like an introduction to Sephardic Judaism, or Sephardic Judaism 101, call it, right?
Yeah.
If you want to know the basics of, with sources, and he really organized it in a beautiful way.
Yeah.
So
but I personally,
Yes.
Mahlok L'Shem Shamayim,
okay.
start with Forbidden Meditations. Why?
Really?
Because Horizontal Society is challenging, especially at the beginning.
Yes.
Alphabetic thinking, analphabetic. It's challenging.
So you start Forbidden Meditations.
I would say go to the end of the book, Forbidden Meditations, because it's all written in a very popular way. That's why it's called Popular Essays on Unpopular Topics. It's because this is one book that my father wrote, which is easy to read.
This was published for the first time, Forbidden Meditations. It has
Yeah,
not
it
been
never-
published in the past.
Never published. Also, Text in Society was never published in the past.
Okay.
I believe it was published in French, but not in English.
Unbelievable.
Or maybe it wasn't published in French. It was originally written in French, and then we have also an English version of the book.
Okay,
so,
great. So, I think we covered a lot of Hakham Faur today. We really did. And, I really miss him personally.
Yeah.
His summers where he used to come to deal were, I never got the pleasure of hanging out with you, but we used to have him in the summers, and it was great. He one time gave us a class on Mishnah Masechet Terumot, and I got a little bit of how do we do Mishnayot in the way of I used to whenever he would have a class, I'm there. I'm always the first one there.
Nice.
Because my father always, I always heard it from as a little kid. Hakham Faur, Hakham Faur, so obviously it stays with you. And I know the Torah well myself, Torah Shebechtav, right? But with his Torah Shebe'al Peh, it really comes to life to me. The written word, he brings it to life for you. So it's really great to sit with you.
Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to do that. Guys, get this book. It is available, like you said, in Eichler's,
Amazon.
And
it's the Library of the Jewish People, José Faur, the Horizontal Society and Political Thought.
Just to finish, because I know we covered his whole life. So he ended up going to Israel.
Yeah.
I think he was a professor in the University of Netanya. Is that right?
And then also Bar Ilan University. He was a professor of law in Netanya and professor of Talmud in Bar Ilan University. I want to say one thing before you finish.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
It's important to say my father was the happiest person I knew.
Yes.
Well, he was always happy. And he really used to say the pasuk all the time, "Malach hagoel oti mikol ra." He really believed Hashem was with him, and he felt the presence of Hashem, and Hashem always was with him.
You should know.
And he never, even when he left the community, he was happy. He knew it's Hashemayim, and he was right. I mean, he did the Torah that he right.
It's funny you're bringing that pasuk because on Friday nights we have this custom of
Malach. Yeah.
My father uses this pasuk for
bracha
for me, and I use it for my kids.
Yes.
So you know.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
So that's beautiful. And to finish just the story real quick, he would live in Israel during the year. Is that right?
Yes.
And then come to deal for the summers.
Yes.
Teach. He taught. I mean, I used to sit in his classes, but he would even have private classes with his main students of Talmud. Which, by the way, besides this. I know you probably guys have plans of publishing maybe his notes that he had on Talmud, because like going back to the beginning of this interview, his Surata D'Shmata is really different than everything else we have in Gemara nowadays. Not that that's, let's say not good and this is good, but it's a different approach. It's a structured approach,
right.
A very, top to bottom type of approach, like you said before. And it was really great to, spend time with him and deal. When we used to have him, he would say all these stories like we said before. But again, thank you for your time, okay? Thank you for the stories and for the education that you gave us.
Thank you.
Just a few closing words. This was really to, I don't want to say set the record straight, but, a lot of times a person will have a certain tag, call it, right? Or let's say he gets this tag controversial, or gets this tag, whatever the tag might be of the person. But I wanted to bring the full person to the picture and to the public, right?
Right.
Especially that he had such an effect on my family and my father's family, right? And I think that he had that kind of effect on many other families in this community, including people who ended up being his rivals, right?
Yes.
Including people like we said in the beginning. So that was the reason for this. Thanks for listening. Rabbi Abe, thank you for being on, okay?
Yes, pleasure.
And guys, go get the book, because it's really worth it. And have a great day. Hanukkah Sameach, Chodesh Tov, and this was very enjoyable.
A pleasure. The pleasure was mine. Thank you so much for taking the time.